Hi, I'm Natasha Sinyanovich, a public radio journalist, and this is Women Like Sex, a myth-busting podcast that examines the many, many medical, scientific, and social facts about female sexuality that were never, in fact, facts. Especially the very modern-day belief that women don't like sex as much as men do. I'll be speaking with experts, educators, friends, comedians, and listeners of all ages, backgrounds, and parts of the globe to flip the scripts on myths and misconceptions that have long been dictated by not women. Together, we'll replace so much inaccurate messaging with healthier, smarter, factual facts and get the sex ed we wished we'd gotten. In the U.S., much of the research on female sexuality, a young field to begin with, has been conducted on white women, meaning we know even less about the sexual pleasure and pain of Black women. That gap is being filled by sexuality researchers like Dr. Shemeka Thorpe. This week's guest has been named one of the top Black sexologists in the country to follow. Shemeka's published more than 60 peer-reviewed articles to date and shares some of her favorites with us, including Pleasure Mountain, the Superwoman Schema, and some wild and funny names she hears for genitalia. She also explains why comparative studies continue to paint BIPOC women in a negative light, and she's working hard to ensure that Black women tell their own stories. There are a number of studies, people, and resources mentioned here, including Shemeka's own website. All the links can be found on the episodes page of womenlikesex.com, episode 9. We begin our conversation with her interviewing me about what inspired the podcast.
What made you want to start it?
First of all, I'm a woman. This has been gestating for a while because I grew up between two cultures. I was born in what used to be Yugoslavia, but just the relationships towards sex are very different in the US as they are in Slavic culture. What I know of it, I mean, I didn't grow up there. I was 4 when we moved to the US. Then I lived in Italy for a long time. And long story as short as I can make it, I was talking to some friends in Italy. This was years ago. Women, friends, acquaintances, colleagues. And I mentioned something about going out on a date with a guy in college who afterwards said, well, now that we've eaten like our burger and fries, we're at some diner, you owe me sex. And they were like, well, that's crazy. That's insane. Like, that's a sick person. It's like, that's American dating. By then I had already realized that, the US is far more violent than any other country in the global north to begin with. And sex is wrapped up in that. So why wouldn't there be more violence as well? So I eventually started covering gender violence when I started working for the NPR station in Nashville. Yeah, slowly over time, it's like, we need to take back the narrative of female sexuality. So welcome.
Thank you.
What made you decide to start doing your field of research?
So several things. I think for me, I started out teaching sex ed with middle school girls. And so that was just a fun time for me, seeing what they thought they knew and what they really didn't know. I was super excited just to be able to teach them and learn from them and also learn from high schoolers as well. And I saw a lot of times that there was kind of this discrepancy in what they were learning from their friends, which was rooted in the internet, and then what they were learning from their family members, which was rooted more in like shame and religion. And so when I started doing research around sexuality, I was really interested more in like sexual messaging, but then also college hookup culture. So I started out being a sexuality educator at Florida State under the sexual health coordinator at the time. And it was just cool to teach workshops on like things that people wanted to learn about and students wanted to learn about at Florida State. We talked about like hookup culture and dating apps and safety within dating apps and consent and contraceptives. So I, throughout my doctoral program, focused primarily on college students, but I knew I was always passionate about doing work specific to Black women and specific to pleasure. And so that's what led me to doing this work, is mainly because there was a gap in research that was on sexual pleasure among Black women and just sexual functioning broadly. Like if we're talking about desire and orgasm and arousal, all those things are missing from the literature.
Right. It's like an inverted pyramid. If you look at female sexuality in general, tended to not be written or studied from a female point of view because men were the doctors and the scientists and the thinkers and etc. And then you take that down to, well, when they did start or what they were studying was basically white women.
Mhm.
So there's less and less information
Mhm.
as you go along the color spectrum.
Yeah. And I think related to Black sexology, we see that most of the time it's focused on HIV prevention and teen pregnancy prevention and STI prevention. And that's for various reasons, right? Yes, we do have some of the highest HIV rates as Black women, STI rates, we do have that. But we're not just that.
Right.
I wanna focus on the other components that are not studied, and so that's what led me to focusing more on pleasure and then on sexual pain, because that was one of the barriers to pleasure that Black women often mention was pain, but also things around religion, things around sexual anxiety. So I was just focused on what they told me, and I said, "Okay, let's go from there."
What is some of the research that you're proudest of that you've done so far?
Mm. The 3 papers I'm most proud of are from the pain and pleasure study. So that data was collected in 2021. And during that time, I was a postdoc and I had graduate students that were helping me with interviews. And we really did research with women that were in the southern US. I'm from the South, so I'm from North Carolina. And I really care about the health of women in the South. And I think oftentimes we have limited resources, depending on if we're in a rural area or not. So, what was most important to me was creating this definition of sexual anxiety. We saw a lot of research focused primarily on performance anxiety, but when we were talking to Black women, it wasn't just limited to performance. And so we actually published that paper in the Journal of Sex Research, and so we have a comprehensive definition of what is sexual anxiety, what causes sexual anxiety for Black women, how they deal with it, and then implications for, I guess, therapists and counselors to assist Black women as they work through sexual anxiety. And then also as a pleasure mountain paper. So that's one of
I
my
was gonna
favorite
ask you
papers.
about Pleasure Mountain.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite papers to talk about. It's like, how do you define pleasure? What is pleasure? And so we were drawing it out. I have several whiteboards at my house and at work. So we were like drawing out. This was like in COVID. So I'm like showing a whiteboard. So I'm like, this is, what they're defining as pleasure. Now, what does this look like as a figure? And we realized there was kind of this like peak of pleasure that women were trying to get to. And so we mapped that out. And in the mountain, there are these facilitators for pleasure. But at the foundation of it, there was emotional aspects, mental aspects, and physical aspects that really bolstered them getting up to the peak pleasure. And so to me, those are my two studies that I'm most proud of.
What were the most prevalent sort of causes and roots of pain and anxiety that you found?
So for anxiety, it was having a partner they weren't familiar with, basically not having strategies to communicate what was pleasurable for them and what was not, but also if that person was safe and if that person was trustworthy. So going into a casual sex encounter, they were more anxious than if they were having sex with a partner that they were in a relationship with. They also had some anxiety around just like people that had been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, also that went into the bedroom where then they had sexual
Of
anxiety.
course, yeah.
And then we also saw that there were some things around sexual trauma. So people that had experienced sexual trauma and sexual violence started having flashbacks and when they were having sexual intercourse, and that really made them anxious as well. And then also just like genital image and hygiene, which led to a completely different study where we started doing generational genital messages. And we were interested in the messages that Black women and men have received across time about genital hygiene and grooming. But that was something that appeared as well. Like they were very concerned and like in their head and spectatoring about, oh, am I okay? Is this okay? Am I clean enough? Like those types of things that we didn't necessarily expect to come up,
Mhm.
but they did and led to another study.
I imagine the intersection there between social messaging and, well, social
Mhm,
messaging being the umbrella, but racism,
mhm.
colorism, right?
Absolutely.
You have so many
Yeah.
women who think that there's something wrong with their vulva, and
Mhm,
if you're looking online, if you're looking at the literature, if you're looking at, I mean, and literature is a big word for that. If you're looking at images, they tend to be white.
mhm,
So you already have a lot of white
mhm,
women who feel really anxious about and think that there's something wrong when you with their
mhm.
genitals, and when you add, and men too, but if we're focusing on women, then when if all
Yeah,
your images
yeah,
are of a certain color, lack of
yeah,
color.
absolutely. So, that was something that definitely appeared as well. I think those are the main things. There were other things, but those are the main ones.
There's the anxiety, there's all these causes of anxiety. What about all these underlying reasons for the anxiety? And I'm sure there's a lot of overlap with pain. Were there also things connected to messaging in terms of pain and in terms of like what we're taught sex is? And we're taught that basically sex is
Mhm.
heteronormative to begin with, but it's P and V intercourse. And that's not where most
Yeah.
women get their pleasure.
Yeah. So we didn't ask them what caused them to experience pain. I don't believe. No, we didn't. I don't believe we asked them that. But we did ask about like how they cope with pain and then what prevented them from communicating with their partner or their medical provider about pain. So there's different papers on partner communication and provider communication. And one thing that we did see that appeared was superwoman schema. And so it's this idea and this concept, basically a maladaptive coping strategy that Black women use, sometimes as a safety precaution, but basically it means that people are suppressing their emotions. They feel like they have to put the needs of other people first. They're always caring for others, and they're determined to succeed without limited resources. So, meaning they may have sexual pain, but they don't necessarily know how to deal with it. And before they go to the doctor, they're going to spend hours or weeks or months researching what it is. So that way, when they go to the doctor, they feel prepared to talk about it because of fear of judgment from their medical provider. So it's like a whole spiral of things. With talking to their male partner, they often felt like they had to protect their ego. And if it was a partner during casual sex, it did not feel safe to bring up, like, oh, I'm in pain, or oh, this isn't pleasurable for me. And so, in one of our papers, we wrote about collective wisdom of Black women related to sexual pain and pleasure. We asked them, what do you think other Black women need to hear or see to learn more about sexual pain? And a lot of them really wanted the church to talk more about sex broadly, to have multi generational conversations about pain, and to address some of these narratives that we hear, whether that be through music, some of the narratives we see on social media, within movies, where people are saying, oh, it's pleasurable, or, there's like rap songs that are like, oh, you got to beat it up, and how that's kind of violent.
Mhm.
And so making sure that we're addressing, those things, as well as doing sex education with men, because they felt like, especially for those that were heterosexual, they felt like men didn't know that they shouldn't be doing that, or maybe women would prefer if it was their sex was slower, or how would they know if a woman is in pain? Like, what are some nonverbal cues? And so they really wanted sex ed for men as well.
It is pretty staggering, right? The how limited women feel in their ability to say that they're in pain or that they're not comfortable.
Hmm.
Generally speaking, there's a friend of mine who has been working in these spaces for so long. It's like, if we can't talk about it with our clothes off,
Right.
how can we talk about it with our clothes on? But, I often think like if I were sitting somewhere and somebody came and sat on me, I'd be like, that hurts. Or I don't really want to sit on my
Hmm.
lap and be like, yeah, okay, but
Hmm.
you just need to shift a little, or, your bony butt's digging into me or
Hmm.
something. Where, and then when you get, yeah, and then
Hmm.
all of these layers come into play and the ego pleasing.
Hmm.
So on your website, you've already started talking about this, but you present your work as cultivating space for multi-generational conversations about sexual well-being among Black women. Outside of the research that you're
Yeah.
doing, what does that look like and what do the conversations center on?
Yeah, so it varies what the conversations sit around. So that looks like community workshops where we have done workshops with people, with Black women who are survivors of sexual assault. And it's been like pleasure education, and also going through how to practice mindfulness during sex. Because we know that sometimes when people have experienced sexual trauma, they often are not in their body during sex because it doesn't feel safe to be in their body. And so that's a space for multi generational conversations, because a lot of times some of the people that are in the room are mothers. And so they're having conversations with their daughters. Sometimes there's a big age range. So we have people that are in their early 20s to people that are in their mid 40s that are in the room. When we do other workshops and programs, it could just be around pleasure in general and how we define it, and just seeing those differences. I've done healthy love intervention, which is a sex positive HIV prevention intervention in Louisville that I conducted. And it was just cool because it was multi-generational, because I was way younger than the people together in the room. And so just hearing them, and we play this like name game. So it's like, name all the things you can for like vagina, vulva, penis, and just seeing some of the names, right? I'm like, that's multi-generational, because where did this come from?
What were some of the funnest or funniest that do you remember?
Oh my gosh. So for vulvas, it's always something related to a flower, like rose, lily, those types of things. One of them called it a fruit box. And I was like, interesting. I'm trying to think of some other ones. We always have ones like pocketbook, purse. For penis, it's always a man's name. So it's like Jimmy, Long Schlong. And I'm like, okay, how did we get here? Jackhammer, that was one. I was like, oh, okay. So, just looking at the comparisons between the two different, how we use names and how we name things, it has been super helpful and super interesting. But also, I have multi-generational conversations in my family. Like, I feel like most Black women that I know that are sexuality educators, we become sexuality educators for our family, whether we want to be or not. And so we have to set boundaries around that. But a lot of times, like, we are the people that are helping our community, or we're helping our elders, or maybe our elders didn't have a safe space to talk about sex, and now they want to tell us
Mhm.
everything, like whether we asked or not. And so I think is more or less being that safe space for people, and creating a space that's judgment, hopefully judgment free, where people can come in and talk. So maybe it's a mom and a daughter, but then there's also someone younger than them in the room. To me, that's what's most important, because we're all learning. And I think a lot of times, younger adults think that, oh, elders think they know everything, or adults think they know everything, and we really don't. And so just making sure that we're all learning from one another.
I mean, some days, to me, it feels like we don't know anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will show people a clitoris and,
Yeah.
women, men, older men, younger, and most people, because it's me, people will guess. Often they'll be like, "Oh, I
Mhm.
guess you're doing this project. Is that a clitoris?" But the fact that they
Mhm.
can't recognize their own sexual organ, as I keep saying, if it bit them on the nose, is just
Yeah.
some days it just makes me wanna weep. Keep trying to laugh through this. Keep trying to laugh through all
Yeah.
this, and the fact that I didn't know what it looked like until relatively recently in the span of my lifetime.
Yeah. I have a clitoris mug, and my parents were staying with me one time, and I went downstairs. It was like early in the morning. I went downstairs, they were making coffee, and my dad was drinking out of the mug. And I was like, he has no clue what is on that mug.
I love it. I love it where he's just
It's like, okay.
I have a portrait of a clitoris that my boyfriend painted. It's like
Mhm.
a big canvas. I forget the size of it. It's in our hallway landing right now, like on the steps. But I feel like I could put it in my office. If I put a penis up there, that would have been flagged immediately. If I put a clitoris up there, maybe one out of 20 people that went
Yeah.
in, that came into the office would have been like, why?
Mhm.
Why? What
Mhm.
is it? Or not what is it, but why do you have this? Otherwise, they just would have
Mhm.
thought it was conceptual art. This is the only time in modern history, at least in the global north, where we think of men as hypersexual. It's always been women.
Mhm.
But even these stereotypes of women being not asexual, but definitely less sexual than men, are pretty much reserved for white women,
Mhm.
right? White women, Asian women, 2.0. I can talk mostly about North America.
Mhm.
Whereas Black women in North America, especially, have been hypersexualized. I shouldn't say
Mhm.
especially, but
Mhm.
extremely hypersexualized to justify systemic sexual violence that was part of the systemic abuse of racism. Or sorry, not
Yeah.
racism. I mean, yes, racism, but slavery. How have Black women absorbed this messaging, right? This has been, we're now talking
Mhm.
centuries in terms
Mhm.
of their view of their own body, their comfort or discomfort of their own body.
I think it depends. So especially for people that are in the Bible Belt, right? So if we're thinking about the South, US South, and thinking about the Bible Belt, a lot of times that hypersexualization or fear of being hypersexualized turns into, well, let me tell people they shouldn't have sex and shame them if they do it through religion. And so that's one way where it's definitely been internalized, whereas the Black church is like, well, no, you shouldn't be having sex. You should not have premarital sex. If you do, it's a sin. And so people then internalize that, oh, this is a sin, right? I should not be doing this. This is terrible. But then on the other side of that, sometimes it is internalized through self objectification. So there is research. I haven't done a lot of research on self objectification, but there is research around why people objectify themselves and how sometimes that is linked to previous messages that people have received. It's also linked to, oh, well, I'm not supposed to be in control of my body. I'm just a vessel for men's pleasure anyway. So if this is how I get attention from men is through sex, then let me go do that. And so I think that that's one thing that can be harmful, that I've seen as far as like internalizing hypersexualization. But definitely, I think this fear of hypersexualization impacts a lot of things. So, as I said, the messages that we receive from the Black church, the conversations that we might have with a partner, right? A lot of times Black women don't say or may not say, like, this is pleasurable or this is not pleasurable, or are not comfortable talking about pleasure and fear of being hypersexualized. They're not comfortable in talking about sexual dysfunction with their OBGYN because they're fear of being hypersexualized. So this is more of this fear of it than, I feel like than the internalization of it.
Do you ever work with OBGYNs to try and help them?
I have not. I think for me, I'm more interested in doing work with medical students. So that would be possibly doing gram rounds with like the department at UK at University of Kentucky, because that's where I am now. I haven't worked specifically with OBGYNs. I think it's something that is important, but I think sometimes we need to grab people earlier
Right.
while they're students. Maybe it will click like, oh, this is important. Like I remember 2 months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, I went to the OBGYN and I was so happy they had a question about sexual pain on their intake form. And I remember like when I first joined that office, they had that question there, but I had forgot about it. And I remember that was the first time that I had ever seen that question on a form.
Yeah, when I think about it, I mean, I'm older than you are. I don't think I've ever been asked.
Yeah.
And I've asked OBGYNs that I know, my own as well, my former one in Nashville, like, have you ever asked women if they've been sexually assaulted, for example? Have you ever asked
Mhm.
women if they have any kind of, if they have anxiety over just a routine exam?
Mhm.
And I mean, and consistently, and I've mostly had women as OBGYNs, some men sometimes, and they've been well, no, I've had some terrible ones. In Italy one time, I had this older man tell me, he's like, "And now take off your panties."
Oh, oh no. Mm-mm.
And I was like, "Mm-mm, no, we're done. We're done." And I walked out and he just started cursing at me. He's like, "What the hell? What the fuck?" Like, I'm
Oh.
like, "No, no, I don't wear panties. Like, I'm a grown-ass woman. I don't,
Mhm.
mm-mm." But yeah, the amount of questions or the lack of questions that I've gotten from the women
Mhm.
it's staggering. The silence on that is pretty staggering. To go back to research aspects, you talk about, you are also working on overcoming the biggest obstacles to ensuring Black women's voices are included in academic literature
Mhm.
in sexual health and well-being. And when I wrote to you, when I sent questions, I presume that white people are first and foremost the biggest obstacle,
Mhm.
right? Just the lack of
Mhm.
even thinking that there is a need to
Mhm.
include other voices
Mhm.
other than white.
Mhm.
Other than themselves, because again, if
Yeah.
men were for a long time, the only doctors and scientists, etc., when women started entering those workforces more and more, so if we're talking, if we're talking North America, we're talking where you're talking the U.S., it's predominantly white women.
Yes. So I definitely sometimes, and I still get comments now from reviewers about like, oh, this would be more beneficial if you had a comparative study and you did this with white women. Or I'll do a presentation and they'll be like, well, how is this different than white women?
They're like, well, what about us?
Yeah. One of my graduate students presented at a conference in February. A white man came up to her afterwards and was like, I think you need to include white women to add more oomph to your study. And it was like, oh, but that's not what this is for, and that's not necessary. And so there's been articles written, luckily, over the past 5 to 8 years about why we don't need comparative research and how it's been problematic. So doing comparative research is helpful sometimes for just like baseline level data to see like, oh, these are differences in STI rates, HIV rates, differences in orgasms, differences in arousal, differences in motivations for sex. Okay, that's fine. But if all we're doing is comparative research and everyone that is marginalized is always at a deficit, then it's problematic. A lot of times, what I've seen with research that is deficit based on Black women, it is led by white researchers. But people that are doing research that is asset based or focuses more on sex positive aspects is led by Black women. And so, and it tends to be more qualitative than quantitative. So we're capturing, interviews and focus groups versus just numbers, because we know the importance of stories. And so, we've had research conducted on us by white people, so the numbers are there, but the voices are usually from Black women researchers.
Yeah, the idea of oomph. Sorry, I can't like. Yeah, I, I apologize in the name of all white people.
Mhm,
To me, it's really
mhm,
important to talk to as many people as possible to have as much
mhm,
inclusivity and as much representation because even as I mean, I come from the cradle of whiteness. I'm Eastern European.
mhm,
I can't speak for all white women. I can't speak
mhm,
for all white women born in Southern Europe or born, I can't speak for any kind of monolithic group. I can really only speak for myself or, the overlap of things that kind of make up my life. So to speak for others as well, to speak for Black women, to speak for Native
mhm,
American women, to speak for
mhm,
any woman from across the continent of Africa or Asia. It's like, why?
mhm.
Well, but power uses itself as a measuring stick, right?
Oh, yeah.
that's always been the case. Um, when you talked about orgasm and pleasure, I was wondering, have you done studies on when you talked about hookup culture on orgasm gaps among Black men and women or Black women and like hetero, queer, trans, like they do they match the broader studies? And I don't even know. I just realized I don't even know if how diverse the broader studies are.
Yeah, there was a study that was recently published on the orgasm gap. I don't know who did it though. I can't think off the top of my head. I know I've posted it on my Instagram, but the largest gap was between Black men and Black women, I believe. I don't want to misquote that, so I might go look real quick.
Oh
But
yeah, definitely. I want to know.
that was something that I have seen, but I haven't done any research on the orgasm gap. One, because that takes a lot of resources to be able to do that, because that means you need a nationally representative sample of people, which can cost a lot of money, in order to get that funding.
One of the people I spoke with is Lori Mintz, the author of Becoming Cliterate, and
Mhm,
she talked about for her book, for example, the pool that she drew from were her students at the University of
mhm.
Florida. I'm just curious, does a study like that, because you have students coming from various parts of the country, does that help reduce costs? Is that something that can be done?
So that would be more of convenience sampling, and people actually push against that a lot. Reviewers do, because they know that you just sample college students because you had access to them.
Mm.
And college students aren't reflective of the broader population of people. So usually manuscript reviewers will push back and say, like, no, you shouldn't do that. And I think it's true of when we're thinking about educational background and what the orgasm gap looks like for someone who's working full time, but still might be low income, right? Or someone that has 6 kids. What does their orgasm gap look like? So I think that has to be done with a larger sample, like nationally representative, kind of like the work that Dr. Debbie Herbenek does. The study on the orgasm gap was done by Wetzel and colleagues. And the orgasm gap is the largest between white men and women and Asian men and women when compared to their Hispanic and Latino peers and their Black peers.
Okay, so it's greater among white
White
men, white
white
people,
people
yeah,
and Asian.
white nation.
Mhm,
That doesn't surprise me in the sense that well, and this is maybe my bias talking, but I think of white people, and if we're talking about Americans, as pretty uptight.
mhm,
The ability to talk to one another in the States among white people, I find, is much, much lower than among,
mhm,
Serbo-Croatian folks, or then I can only really speak for, well, no, but even Europe in general, because I mean, I spent 16 years in Italy, but traveled a lot in Europe, have a lot of friends from various parts of Europe, friends from South America, and yeah, communication is just so much more open.
yeah,
That spills into the bedroom,
mhm.
the ability to talk to one another. And well, before I ask you the magic wand, I want to ask you about your magic wand. If you had all the resources in to create a sex ed class, if you had a magic wand and all the resources for research, What's some of the research that you would do? If someone said, here is, money is no object
Yeah.
and time.
I would love to create, I don't even know if it's research necessarily, but I would love to create a sexual pain clinic specifically for Black people that focuses on holistic treatment. So, including pelvic floor therapists, including mental health practitioners, including sex counselors, sex therapists, tantric workers, somatic therapists, whoever we may need in that space to help with pain, dysfunction, pelvic pain, anything like sexual anxiety. That's what I would love to do. And right now, research magic wand is just keeping
Used to
funding.
be, yeah. I was gonna say.
Right. So at this point, unfortunately, like a lot of my colleagues have lost funding, and it's very disheartening to be a researcher right now, and it's discouraging, and it's hard to, I think, keep momentum and be hopeful because a lot of sexual health funding, gender funding, LGBTQ funding has gone away. And so magic wand right now for research is just that everybody that lost funding gets it back and that we continue to have it.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good answer because that is, yeah,
Mhm.
it's a frustrating and scary time right now. So yeah, so magic wand for sex ed.
That people have access to it, that they have access to comprehensive sex ed, that college students have access to it, because right now that's something that might not exist.
Hmm. What's the situation like in Kentucky? I mean, I know so I spent 6, 7 years in Nashville before moving to Syracuse. Yeah, in rural parts, it was non-existent. Even in Nashville, it depended on the school, kind of depended on, or the Nashville area, the metro, depended on
Yeah.
really depend on the area.
We're abstinence only. It does not have to be medically accurate. It might be taken out of schools. There's been bills for it to be taken out of schools. We don't have anything DEI related. The university got rid of all of DEI related things,
Mm.
including identity based graduations, which they looped under DEI,
What's identity-based graduations?
first generation college student graduations, the lavender graduation for LGBTQ students, and the Black student graduation. So, yeah.
Yeah,
And language has had to change, obviously, but language has had to change in relation to sexual health and, testing, even like STI testing on campus. There's been name changes on what can be used on flyers and things like
what are
that.
the new names?
I don't know. I think they could just say testing,
Just random testing.
like health testing. So my hope is that people have access to sex ed throughout their lifespan. I will say that though, throughout their lifespan, and that people are still able to have access to medically accurate information. I think it's important. It will be a tragedy if everyone has to learn about sex ed through social media.
Yeah,
But that's what will happen if we don't have.
news media regular, and I say that as a member of the news media. News media is bad enough,
Mhm,
and entertainment is bad enough in terms of perpetuating
mhm,
bad or narrow messages and images of sex and sexuality. Social media is just a free for all.
yeah.
I want to something you said really resonated with me, and I think I was listening to one of the other podcasts you were on, that pleasure is so often not discussed when discussing sex ed. And
Mhm,
that really resonated with me because my stance is that we should be teaching children
mhm,
from as young as age as possible is plant the seeds of sex is fun, right? All of it, everything that
mhm,
we call sex is fun. If nothing else, to have them recognize when something isn't fun, when a situation doesn't feel good, when it doesn't feel safe, when it just doesn't feel fun. And that could just be boring.
mhm.
If we focus on the pleasure, the way that we do when we're teaching them
Yeah,
other things, sports, food,
yeah,
extracurriculars that they're going to do, just to have it be that. So when they just go like, okay, this isn't fun. So this isn't sex. Because if we don't equate sex with pleasure, we're going to perpetuate the predator versus prey model. And then what we're really doing is equating it with crime.
yeah, absolutely.
When you taught middle schoolers, were you able to focus on that? Were you able to slip that in there somehow?
No. We talked about motivations, so we could talk about why people engaged in sex, but we couldn't talk about things related to pleasure, no. And I do have some colleagues that do like a great job of saying like sex should be pleasurable. Let's talk about early ages. But I think things that I've seen is that people of color, specifically women of color, and I'm going to say men of color, there's not that many there's more women of color that are sexuality educators than men of color, but I think BIPOC educators are often criticized and called names such as like perversions and things like that when they try to promote things as like sex should be pleasurable among younger people and try to educate that to others. And so I think we need more white people that are saying that, because we are already hypersexualized anyway, and then you add that to the picture, it just creates a whole different narrative. So I've never been able to talk to middle schoolers about it. I have great colleagues that do. I'm not in the school system anymore, and I don't work with like youth anymore. But there's people that are doing the work and writing like body safety books, or what is consent and how do we learn about consent versus sexual coercion, and what is unwanted sex versus what is assault, those types of things I think have been helpful. But unfortunately, I haven't been able to talk about pleasure to middle schoolers or high schoolers, yeah, but middle schoolers, no.
Which is, I mean, it's a shame for so many reasons. Again, the stereotypes, the
Hmm.
stereotyping of Black hypersexuality,
Hmm.
then the social inability. I mean, kids are having sex at a
Hmm.
young age.
Yeah.
I mean, they always have. We
Hmm.
think that we've just invented, because of so much access to porn and social media, that we've invented young, kids having sex young.
Yeah.
I don't think our earliest ancestors were thinking like,
Yeah.
there's this urge, we shouldn't be, thousands and thousands of years ago, probably too young to do this.
Yeah.
Is my understanding you grew up in the church, correct?
Yeah.
Have you seen conversations change since you were young to now? Because you talked about earlier that people want to see more conversations in the church. Have you seen that happening?
I think there's been more programming around HIV prevention. I don't think there's been things related to sex. Now, I do have a colleague, Brittany Brodus Smith, who does work with Christian sexology. And so she's been in churches, she's been to singles events, singles like ministry, singles conferences at churches. So they're doing it. But I think there's been more around like, oh, there's a community health fair and there happens to be a sexual health table. So when churches have put things on, sometimes I would be there and be passing out like flyers or pass out condoms in the past. And I only had like one or two people that made faces, but outside of that, everybody was fine with it. But I don't think open communication about like sex broadly is being talked about. It's just like, oh, let's be preventative without having a
Right?
conversation.
Let's prevent what? I don't know. Something.
Yeah.
That thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we can't talk about it with our clothes off, how the hell are we going to talk about it with our clothes on? Um, well, which is what I'm trying to do. Well, what you do with your work, but I'm
Yeah.
trying to be the vessel for all y'all who are doing the groundwork
Hmm.
outside of my work as a journalist. Um, Personally, do you remember some of the myths that as you were coming into your own sexuality, as you were starting to be sexually active, and this is not to ask you about your sexy time practices, but
Hmm.
that you started thinking, oh, wait, this can't be right, and this can't be right, and this can't be right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think for me, like the biggest one was like masturbation being a sin. And it just made me feel so much shame around doing it that I didn't want to do it. But then when I did it, I liked it. So I was like, yeah, I don't know about this one. So I think that was a big one. I think also growing up in the church, people were often like shaming girls that were pregnant early. So like maybe they were pregnant at like 14 or 15. And they would always like shun them or be like, don't be like them, but no one would help them. And I think that's what motivated me to want to like help, because even in high school, there was always someone like every year in high school, there was at least 5 girls that were pregnant. So, and my high school was like a graduating class of 400.
Mm.
At least like 5 girls were pregnant that we were aware of. And so I always wanted to be like, oh, well, who's helping them? Because we didn't have a clinic and things of that nature. We didn't have a clinic. We didn't have, you can only get condoms from the grocery store or Family Dollar. So, that was a whole thing. I think another myth was just around like being in the South and how LGBTQ people are sometimes shunned and excommunicated, whether that be from church or family. And so I think for me, knowing that you can have chosen family is important, and you have people that love you and that the world doesn't hate you. I think that that's something that's been beautiful to see as I've moved around in my adulthood, but also just coming into my queerness too.
Along with your own work, what are some other good
Mhm.
resources for people who want to, for reading or listening to, for having a better understanding, a deeper
Yeah.
understanding? of Black women's sexual health and how to improve it?
Number one is always, there's a saying of like trust Black women, which Sister Song Reproductive Justice Collaborative has come up with. So making sure that Black women are always at the center of the work that's being done. Understand that we know what's best for ourselves. I have a book list on my website. So if people go to my website, www.drshemeka.com, there's a list that pops up on the web browser where you can click and see a book list related to Black sexuality. There's always people that are writing good books and writing things related to Black sexuality. And I think also just being mindful of like conferences that might exist that people may want to go to as well, but checking your biases and identities to see like, is that the space for you or not? Yeah, I think those are the main things. There's tons of books. There's a book list somewhere. Also, there's a pelvic floor therapy website that the vagina rehab doctor has, and she has a directory just of women of color that are pelvic floor therapists. So if anybody's looking for a pelvic floor therapist, definitely check that out because that's been super helpful for a lot of people when I refer them there.
Cool. I will. Yeah, I was just speaking to somebody about pelvic floor therapy for another of the interviews. Um, Thank you. Yeah, those are. I've been looking at your reading list, and I've got sort of I have a list of about 30 books right now that I
Yeah.
want to get, and it's just like, all right, to prioritize with
Mhm.
finances. Um, yeah, I think those are all the questions I have. I mean, I could ask, 1,000 more questions,
Yeah.
but I want to be mindful of your time. Are
Yeah.
there any questions that I didn't ask that I should have?
No, I don't think so.
Any questions you want to ask me?
I asked because I asked it earlier.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That was Dr. Shemeka Thorpe, a researcher and educator on Black female sexuality, whose primary goal, she says, is to make her extensive research relevant. And it very much is. Links to her work, website, and socials, as well as the people and resources discussed, and a transcript of our conversation can be found on the episodes page of womenlikesex.com, episode 9. Women Like Sex is a flipped script production. It is executive produced and edited by me, Natasha Snjanovic. Website design and artwork is by Ted Nunez. Edesio Martinez is associate producer. For more episodes and swag, or to subscribe to the podcast or Patreon, please visit womenlikesex.com, the Women Like Sex YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is Women Like Sex. Pass it on.